one of my favorite follows on social media these days is our first guest. He may not be a household name if you're an MMA fan, but this past weekend he did a phenomenal breakdown of what happened to Robert Whittaker's jaw, which of course led to him tapping, and he's going to have surgery and all that stuff. But really, there's like a love-hate relationship that I have with our first guest, because I typically frantically refresh his page, his Twitter page, his YouTube page when something bad happens to one of my players. For example, when Julius Randle fell on his shoulder and never played a game again for the New York Knicks, I was constantly updating his feed because I wanted to know what the deal is. He does a phenomenal job. He has, I believe, over 800,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I think he does it better than anyone right now in the social media YouTube space. He's an actual real doctor who focuses on sports-related injuries and happens to be a big combat sports fan. And so he knows a lot about this stuff. And I think he's a phenomenal follow and very insightful. I sometimes parrot the things that I hear in his videos and pretend like I actually know what I'm talking about. So after the litany of injuries that we saw at UFC 308 this past weekend in Abu Dhabi, I wanted to have Brian Sutterer on, MD, to join us and help make sense of it all. And wouldn't you know it, we happen to fit in right in the middle of his lunch break. So let's not take up any more of his time. Let us say hello to the doc, who is kind enough to join us right now. There he is from the famous location. This is it. It's a real thing. Hello, Brian. How are you?
Yeah. Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you so much. That super kind introduction. I've loved watching your show over the years. So this is an absolute treat to be able to be here and be able to just hopefully share some education with you all directly.
Yeah, and you do a phenomenal job. Honestly, you really do. Your whole setup is great. In fact, we were talking with the boys before the show. I'm just curious, and I've kind of hinted at this on Twitter, like, can you just tell me about your process? Because you go on your channel like an hour after an injury happens, like Shohei Ohtani injures his shoulder. An hour later, you've got the video, you're wearing the tie, you've got the shirt, you got the whole setup, your hair is fantastic. What is your process? Are you just on the couch scrolling Twitter and you see something, you say, okay, let me fire it up? Is this your home? What could you tell us? Can we peek behind the curtain just a little bit?
So I'm at home right now, and I keep everything set up with my studio so that I'm ready to go. And it's a bit of a love-hate thing, because part of why my channel grew so quick was because I was so fast getting these videos out there. But I mean, I'm a diehard sports fan at heart, and so I'm watching all these big events. I'm on the couch watching Red Zone on Sundays. I'm following all the big UFC fights, and so I'm watching all these events and kind of following anyways. I will say, if you ask my wife, there are plenty of times, though, I think for the Shohei video, I was actually in bed and shouldn't have been on my phone, but was scrolling Twitter, saw the injury happen and thought, hey, let's get up, let's go make a video and let's get this out there. And I love it because people, I think, really love to learn. And the intersection of teaching and sports is just a great combination to be able to teach folks some interesting stuff that you might not otherwise get while watching sports on the couch.
Okay, so much respect to you for that grind and for that dedication. And so part of the reason why I wanted to have you on this particular episode was because we just saw a few gruesome injuries on Saturday, and the most notable one, of course, Robert Whittaker. And I thought your breakdown was phenomenal because if I'm being honest, when I saw the photo that Daniel Cormier posted after the fight, I wasn't really quite sure what I was looking at. Like, I saw 3 teeth there, but I was like, where are they just loose? What's happening there? So of course by now, and we're showing the photo right here, it's kind of hard to tell. But then when you watch your breakdown of it all, it's even worse. And so we know what happened. The neck crank, he taps very quickly, and we find out that there's a whole mess going on inside. Could you tell us exactly what happened based on what you saw?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, we'll see if this works. Through here. I've got the anatomy models. We're ready to go.
This is incredible. So, you're hired, by the way. Can you come work for Uncrowned?
Yeah.
Is that a possibility? Thank you.
So, if you look what we're showing here on the anatomy model here, so that lower jawbone's the mandible. And it's interesting because Whittaker was very clear to say his jaw was fine, which I think is a little bit of a misconception. We think of the typical jaw fractures, right? Like there's a big crack through the bone here on the outside or something. But you've got to remember the teeth are anchored into the bone. The teeth are anchored down into the jawbone. And so what we were seeing in that picture that was just absolutely terrible. I mean, if I'm covering an event and an athlete opens up their mouth and I see that, I'm going to get a little bit queasy. Basically, this lower portion of the bone where those teeth are anchored into the bone broke. And so that's why you see those 3 teeth all still attached together, but they're pushed back into his mouth. So technically, it's not a true jaw fracture like we would typically think about in combat sports, but you still have a break in that lower portion of the jaw, which is why the teeth all stay together as it moves backwards. And so thankfully, if the rest of the jaw is okay, what they likely ended up doing was just pushing that base of the teeth back forward, probably put some wires or like fake, braces across the bottom of the teeth to get it all to heal back in a good position. But yeah, that's that's one of those, it's funny seeing docs covering UFC and they got their fancy suits and their fancy watches. That's one of those I'd be a little bit hesitant to just reach into his mouth and be fishing around with his teeth for sure.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so initially to like, a not very smart person like myself, I just think everything broke. But the way you describe it is almost even worse. And what's interesting is a video has emerged in the last 24 hours of Robert talking about an old jaw injury that he suffered as a kid. And I don't know if you've seen this video, but I want to play it for you here very quickly and ask you if it's possible that old injury kind of creep back up and that's why this happened to him, if that makes sense. Here's Robert talking before the Khamzat fight about something that he had to deal with as a kid.
Yeah, fun story. So when I was 19, I broke my jaw and shattered all my teeth and they had to put a metal plate there. So the skin kind of, if you had a plate anywhere, it bulges. So I kind of had like a bulge on my jaw here and it looked funny. So I grew the goatee out to hide it. Never shaved it off.
Does that injury have anything to do with what happened on Saturday?
Yeah, it definitely could. Looking back at this, right, the plate he's probably talking about with where his goatee is, there was probably some plate going across this lower front portion of his jaw. But when a fracture heals, ideally that bone heals back nice and strong to where it looks like it acts like original bone. But sometimes you get just almost like scar tissue, like fibrous scar tissue that forms across that joint. And instead of it healing nice and strong like bone, it can be a weak spot depending on how it heals. So hopefully, presumably he still has that plate in there. And I can't imagine anything would have broken or been damaged with that plate. So this is probably nearby and somewhat adjacent, but he definitely could have had some weaker tissue in that part of the bone that predisposed him to getting it broke even more, like we saw whenever Khamzat cranked on his chin like that.
The level of strength that a man must possess to do that to another human being, that's absurd strength, right?
Unbelievable. Yeah. Just unbelievable strength. I mean, and just the immediate pain, right? I mean, that's going to be so painful combined with just you're halfway through that fight like he is, you're exhausted. And now suddenly this guy is cranking and pushing so hard that it breaks your lower teeth. It's just unbelievable toughness too.
The process, the surgery to correct that, how long is something like that?
I'm not sure exactly offhand how long it's going to be, but I'd imagine if they don't have to go in and do anything with that original plate that was in there, probably nothing major. They might not even have to do an incision or open them up. Sometimes you can just put the tooth, that kind of bone component back in place. And then instead of putting an internal plate, so internal fixation, you can do an external fixation, or you just put like metal, like a brace essentially across the front of the teeth to help anchor it into the other teeth. Like when we see a basketball or football player buddy tape their fingers, where you take advantage of the normal strength of the finger next to it to brace and support a dislocated finger. You can do a similar thing with these teeth injuries where you take advantage of the teeth in the back of the mouth that are still intact and still nice and secured and kind of use those as a support while the ones that got pushed backwards are allowed to heal. So nothing that should be, like career threatening or keep him out for a significant amount of time. Based on how long these guys take anyways between fights, I would not expect it to necessarily have a huge delay in him coming back.
Wow, really? So it's not like a year or anything like that?
No, I would not think so.
Wow. I said yesterday, if I did something that forced my teeth to do that, I would probably say I don't want anything to do with it ever again. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I could never.
Right?
I'd get punched in the nose once. Yeah, I'd get punched in the nose once in an octagon like that, and I'd have to call it quits. It blows my mind every week. Just, I cover a lot of sports in my job. I'm working and covering a lot of sports on the sidelines, and just the insane level of toughness and grit that these fighters have is just, it's unbelievable to see on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, and he's posting a picture afterwards saying like, I'm all good, I'll be back soon, don't worry about me, with a
crazy
2 thumbs up. It's unbelievable. Will he have to get his jaw wired shut?
Probably not, since there wasn't any other damage to like the rest of the jaw itself. As long as they can get it anchored back into the rest of those teeth, I doubt he'll have to have his jaw wired shut, but you never know once you actually get in there and do the scans of how much other damage you might see that we can't just see from the outside.
When you're watching these fights as a fan, can you tell, like, Rafael dos Anjos, when something happens to him and he goes down, could you tell right away? This may be a crazy question because obviously you're not looking inside, but like, can you tell right away, oh, that's that?
Yeah, sometimes you can. And with RDA, I don't think we've heard, maybe you're aware if we've heard any official report on
No
what
official.
exactly his knee injury was. The thing watching his that I'd be worried about, honestly, is an ACL tear. And I think there's a combination of, we've seen Jameson Williams, Alabama wide receiver a number of years ago, Von Miller, right? Your Buffalo Bills, whenever Von Miller had his ACL tear, there's times when something like an ACL tear occurs. Tom Aspinall, a great example in UFC, where you can see the motion. So our bodies are designed to withstand certain forces, and injuries happen when your joint gets put in a position that injures that tissue. And so if you can pay enough attention to the patterns of the positions that injure the tissue, you can learn about which types of positions are going to cause which injuries. And so that's how I've been able to kind of, predict some of this stuff. And with something like an ACL in fighters, we usually see it when they're backpedaling. They put their leg out behind them to kind of plant and then push off. It's what happened with Tom Aspinall when he was kind of stumbling backwards, put his leg behind him to plant, push off. With an ACL, what you can sometimes actually see is the tibia, the shin bone, will shift forward whenever the ACL has been torn. And then whenever the weight comes off the leg, you'll see the shin pop backwards. And so if you pay attention and go back and watch Tom Aspinall's injury, you'll see a moment where that flat front part of his shin pushes forward. That's telling you the ACL is torn. And then when his weight comes off, pop, you see it pop back into place. And so seeing something like that is a very clear sign that the ACL has been torn. We didn't clearly see that with RDA in his fight, but the position, the mechanism, these non-contact injuries, I would be concerned about a possible ACL tear in his case.
I'm 42 years old, so I'm a product of the 80s, 90s sports team where I knew every single player on every single NBA team, and I remember vividly when Dominique Wilkins tore his ACL, everyone was essentially mourning his career being over. I remember the ACL injury being the death knell. Why in 2024 can a Tom Aspinall suffer an injury like that and come back a year later even better?
Yeah, I think it's multifactorial. I think it all starts, number one, with athletes going into surgeries. I think are just more preconditioned. They do better job at the pre-rehabilitation to get into an optimal position before surgery. Everybody's so much more in tune with nutrition, with just general health, that it puts them in a better position to have good healing going forward. The surgeries themselves are much less invasive. Back in the 80s with Dominique, they were making big, long incisions, opening you up completely. And now we've got arthroscopic surgery where you can go in with just a little camera and fix everything inside the knee without this big, long incision. That reduced incision is going to improve that initial healing time. We've developed new techniques to repair ACLs, reconstruct ACLs. Historically, it was a lot of cadaver grafts where you would go into the cadaver lab and you take a piece of tendon from a cadaver and use that to reconstruct the tendon or the ligament in the case of an ACL. But now we have new techniques. We've got new grafts. We're doing a lot of patellar tendon grafts that are used for reconstruction. So improvement in surgical techniques. And then on the back end, our physical therapy colleagues are doing a much more fantastic job of just the rehab afterwards. We understand more why the injury occurred in the first place, how to rehab and train the muscles to have better control to hopefully not have it happen again. And so I think it's just the whole field in general. We've got better surgical techniques, better rehab, and we just understand these more after having done them for so many years.
On the prelims of UFC 308, there was a fight involving a gentleman named Myktybek Orolbai, and his face was absolutely gruesome. In fact, the whole fight was gruesome. One of those fights where it was so bloody, you weren't sure whose blood was on who. It was just like a bloodbath. And afterwards, you saw his face and his eye was so freaking swollen. I thought for sure, and we're looking at some of the photos right now, you see his eye there. I thought for sure that's a broken orbital. And afterwards, Dana White says, no, it was just swollen. How is that possible? What happens to the face that makes it look like that and not broken?
Yeah, when it looks like that and it's not broken, it's basically just it's blood. It's what we call a hematoma that's accumulated underneath the skin. So if you remember Joanna Jędrzejczyk, when she had her fight against Zhang Weili, right? Big, huge, massive hematoma, swelling on the front of the forehead. That's blood. Basically, the little capillaries, the thin blood vessels underneath the skin tear and rupture whenever you have that force, that punch, and then blood just accumulates in that space. So whether it's the front of the forehead, whether it's around the eye, the reason it has that kind of bluish red hue to it is because that's all blood underneath the skin that's accumulating and causing all that swelling. And it really is just, bad luck or good luck in his case that you don't have an orbital fracture underneath of it, because the same trauma is going to cause both. It's just a matter of exactly hitting in the right certain spot with the right amount of force to cause a break or not cause a break.
Zhang Weili, Mark Hominick, and way back in the day, Hasim Rahman was the first time I ever saw a hematoma on someone's head in a fight. And I always wondered, and in the case, this is Rahman, I mean, that's just like an absolute iconic photo, if we want to call it that. I always wondered, if you punch it hard enough, could it explode? Is that possible?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you punch it hard enough that you tear the skin, you'd have to cut through the surface of the skin. Then absolutely, it could, theoretically explode, right? It's probably not going to burst because there's not a lot of pressure behind it, but it could absolutely, tear in the sense that all that blood could leak out. But, it's funny because I'm going to shock everybody here when I pull up this anatomy model again, because we're going to look at the skull. And, whenever someone's getting punched, our orbit is designed, the eye is designed to specifically protect the eyeball. The eyeball is the important real estate back there. And so it's designed to be, the eyeball's recessed, behind the round part of the brain or the skull, so that if a punch does come in, your skull is taking the brunt of the blow and not the eyeball. And so in a sense, it's good that the skull is there, right? As much as we don't want to have these skull fractures, because without that shape of the orbital bones going all the way around the eyeball, a punch is going to come in and just clearly hit the front of the eye. And so this is all designed to where you've got all these points of impact to take the blow so that fighters don't end up, with completely damaged and lost vision.
When I'm asking these questions, by the way, are you thinking like, boy, that was a stupid question, like the thing can't explode? It's not
No,
like
not
a
at all.
pimple or something?
No, not at all. They're great questions. I think, it's fun to just have different questions for people, because everybody has different curiosities. It's one of the fun part of my channels is that, everybody's curious about this different stuff. And it's always neat to hear different questions, because it also gives me ideas of things to talk about in future videos that, I might not think of people wondering as they're watching this fight, but then, oh, it's a good question. I can factor that into a future video.
We were talking about Jaws a couple weeks ago in Saudi Arabia. There was a gruesome knockout where Fabio Wardley knocked out Frasier Clark. And initially, in the first round, I saw I mean, there it is. It's just one of the most gruesome, vicious knockouts I've ever seen. Side of his head, that's Clark right there. Side of his head was indented, and I was like, "What the hell is that? Is that just the way his body is constructed? Is that the way his head is constructed?" But then you saw his mouth, and it looked like it was the bottom half. The jaw was completely displaced. When you see that, what is going on?
Yeah, I think a couple of things in that case. We're just going to keep this up, right?
I love
Anatomy
it.
lesson for all day. So that area where you were seeing that impression, that indentation on the skin, is right about up here. And there's a couple of things there. Number one, that's your temporomandibular joint. So if you've heard of people talk about their TMJ or having pain at their TMJ, if you move your jaw up and down, you'll feel those bones move. And that's the joint. There's cartilage in there, just like your knee or your hip. And so that little joint sitting right up here where that mandible goes up into the skull can dislocate. And so one possibility is that joint actually dislocated. The other possibility is a fracture. So if you have a fracture, that bone can be depressed in this area where you can get that little depression in the skin. And so really what they do to treat it depends on whether or not, number one, was the jaw dislocated. If so, they're going to try and get the jaw back in place, number one. And then I imagine some type of CT scan to look and see, is anything broken in this whole area? Does he have a fracture higher up there that needs any sort of plate fixation or treatment otherwise? So yeah, wide variety of things. You Russell Westbrook back in the day, right?
Yeah.
When he broke his face and he had this like dent in the side of his head. So same kind of thing, where just the bone gets broke, the bone depresses in, and then the skin gets kind of pulled in with it.
Again, perhaps a silly question. Which injury is worse, that one or what Whittaker suffered?
Ooh, if the jaw's just dislocated, I don't think that's as bad. I think the one that Whittaker suffered is worse, in my opinion, as long as there's not a big major, displaced fracture in the other case. Because in the other case, if that's truly fractured that needs plates, I mean, you're opening up the skin, you're going in there and putting a plate across the bone if it's a severe enough fracture. Whereas Whittaker's, it seems like they're able to just keep everything external and not have to actually go in and cut them back open again.
I understand. Like, we didn't go over any of this, so I understand I'm putting you on the spot here. But since we're talking about the face, I'm reminded of a staph infection that Benoit Saint Denis had on his forehead several months ago prior to his fight against Dustin Poirier. That looks like a horrible pimple gone wrong, right? But it was a staph infection like 10 days before his fight. And we see this often in fights, like someone says afterwards, I had staph, or we see something on someone's knee. How big of a deal is that? To the fighter, like how detrimental could that be? He got knocked out, and so some wondered if that had anything to do with it. But also, like, how reckless is that to fight? He did not. His was cleared up, but some people thought maybe Magomed Ankalaev had it on Saturday. That's just a thing that was thrown out. But we have heard from fighters afterwards saying, like, yeah, I had it, but I wanted to fight. I needed the money. I needed the opportunity. How reckless is that as well?
Yeah, it's not reckless until it is the best way to describe it. I mean, a lot of athletes, a lot of fighters have skin infections that either go unnoticed or unmanaged, and everybody, it turns out, and does okay, because in general, our bodies are good at fighting and handling infections. The concern with, we hear a lot about these staph infections is because there's a specific strain or type of staph bacteria called MRSA, and MRSA is just more resistant to the standard antibiotics and has more potential to spread. So in the best case scenario, you get a little abscess, you get an infection, you get staph somewhere in your body, but it stays local right there in the skin. Adequate course of antibiotics, it's going to clear up, no big deal. The risk is if that infection spreads from just a little abscess in the skin to your bloodstream. And so then if you get that infection in your bloodstream, then you can become septic, we hear about, can become much more sick, and ultimately can become fatal. So it's one of those unfortunate realities of every sport where there's going to be things that don't get appropriately addressed or missed. And I understand it. I mean, a lot of these guys are going into the fights compromised in different ways. So yeah, just as a point, if you have an active staph infection, you don't want to spread that because you could spread it to your opponent. Your opponent might get that infection in their bloodstream. The majority of time, people are going to be okay because our bodies are pretty good at fighting the infection. So it's always unfortunate to see. I wish the fan base was not so quick to react of every little pimple and bump looking like staph, because it's not. Some of these guys like just have acne or something like that. So yeah, it's something that you just kind of have to hope and assume that the docs that are approving these fighters are doing the checks and making sure people have been on antibiotics appropriately. And at the end of the day, hope for the best, I think.
One of the most famous injuries of the year in MMA, Conor McGregor's pinky toe. When you saw the photo after the fact, once he withdrew, were you surprised that he withdrew?
No, just because of the time point he is in his career, right? I mean, I think he's at a stage where his next fight is extremely important if there is a next fight. And so I can absolutely understand him not wanting to go into a fight somewhat compromised. I mean, yeah, it's a pinky toe, but still, you're putting all that weight on the outside of that toe and it's going to hurt. And if your foot hurts to where you can't adequately defend yourself, you can't perform at a high level, nobody cares about your fractured pinky toe if you end up losing that fight. And so I 100% understand. I think it was justified. If it was a different situation, though, where let's say a fighter had one chance only, then it would be safe. There's a difference between things that are safe to try and fight through and things that are going to cause pain and potentially hinder you. And I think it's important to have that distinction. A fractured pinky toe, sure, it's not going to kill you. It's okay. You can try and fight if you can tolerate and manage the pain and kind of understand the risk that it might get worse or might not heal as well afterwards. But also, I think you're very justified in that situation to say, no, I can't function. I can't kick. I can't do what I need to do. And I don't want to compromise the rest of my career if I have a bad performance when nobody's going to care about my fractured pinky toe afterwards.
Mm-hmm. That is a very sensible take. I appreciate that. I will let you go in a moment. Again, thank you so much for this. I did want to ask one last question regarding 308. There was a gentleman named Chris Barnett, who's a fan favorite, who tore his Achilles. And, I remember, speaking of the old days, I remember when my favorite athlete, Patrick Ewing, tore his Achilles. And again, we thought he was done. Kobe Bryant, of course, another famous one as well. Here we have Jamal Hill, tearing his Achilles in July, coming back in April. And just a few months ago, we hear that Chris did as well. Now, I know there's partial tears and there's different levels, but then you see what happened to him with the burst that he had in the intro and then the kick, and you see that he was in a tremendous amount of pain. What do you think happened there? Is it fair to say that maybe he came back too soon?
I don't think so. I don't think it's necessarily for sure. You're right, what you said about there's difference between a full tear, a partial tear, et cetera. If I go to any NBA team in the country and I put an ultrasound or I get an MRI on their Achilles, I'm going to see a lot of little partial tears. I'm going to see abnormal changes in a lot of them, but that doesn't mean that it's damaged or injured to the point that they can't play or it's not safe. And so when we hear something like, well, I had a torn Achilles, number one, if it was a fully ruptured Achilles, we would have heard about surgery. He would have had a much longer recovery like Jamal Hill. And so there was probably just a little strain of the Achilles. I didn't see anything in the initial jump that really caught my attention. And he seemed to actually do pretty decent functionally in the early part of the fight. I agree with what he said about it was when he threw that spinning heel kick, I think it was. And if you look at his left leg as he throws that, he kind of hyperextends his knee. He's a big dude. He's swinging all that weight around. And there is a moment where his knee hyperextends and very easily could have been when a hamstring muscle could be strained. And that, I believe, is what we heard from him about a hamstring injury. It fits with the hyperextension whenever he was throwing that kick back around. And that seemed to be the moment when things were triggered. So it's possible, yeah, the Achilles was aggravating him. He maybe tweaked it in that jump, but I don't think that jump necessarily injured him to the point that it set the stage for the rest of the fight.
I've been refreshing all day to see if there was a Josh Hart video that got posted, but luckily nothing. So maybe that's good news that he's not.
No, what happened to Josh Hart?
Oh, okay, good. Please leave Josh Hart alone. We don't want. No, he left the game. Maybe now we'll get a video, and it'll be all my fault. He left. Apparently, something happened with his shin. His shin hit his knee. It was a weird fall, and Josh Hart is a pretty tough dude. For him to leave is a little worrisome, and his status is up in the air right now. But we'll leave it at that. I don't want to have a standing appointment with you because I know you're a very busy guy. but I have to say, I would love to have you back on, especially when these notable injuries happen, and they tend to happen quite a bit in these big MMA events. This was illuminating. It was fascinating. Loved it. And thank you so much. And congratulations to you on the explosion of your YouTube page and everything you're doing. You're one of my favorite follows and very, very insightful stuff. Sometimes it's bad news that you're delivering, but that's the job, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I think there's always something you can learn from an unfortunate situation. And I appreciate that. Big fan of yours as well. And I'd be more than happy to come back and keep teaching you and keep teaching your audience as much as we can in the future.
Thank you, Doctor. Really appreciate it. All the best.
Take care.
All right, there he is. Dr. Brian Sutterer, MD. First time we've ever had an MD on the program, guys. Don't you feel a hell of a lot smarter now? Thanks for watching this video. Hey, before you go, do me a favor. Hit that sub button. Give us a thumbs up. Hit the little bell thingy as well. Leave us a nice comment or two. We appreciate you all very much.